The night was unusually quiet in the sprawling mansion of Charles Whitman, a millionaire who had everything money could buy, but lived with a constant weight in his heart. Behind the wealth and the luxury lay a silent sorrow. His mother, Eleanor, once a vibrant woman full of life, had not walked for the past 20 years. A car accident had stolen her mobility, and with it, her spirit. She spent her days confined to a wheelchair, gazing out of her window, while her son tried everything wealth could afford: doctors, specialists, surgeries, treatments, and alternative medicine. Nothing had worked. For Charles, success in the business world meant little when every evening he saw his mother imprisoned in her chair, her smile fading year by year. One evening, after yet another failed attempt with a renowned therapist, Charles sat in his study, staring at the framed photograph of his mother before the accident. She had been lively, graceful, the heart of every gathering. Now she was silent, a shadow of herself. Charles whispered to himself that he would give away his entire fortune if only she could stand and walk again. Fate, however, had its own plans, and they arrived in the form of someone he never expected, a new black maid named Grace. Grace had been hired simply to keep the house in order and to take some pressure off the family. She was humble, soft-spoken, and came from a background where hardship had been her greatest teacher. Unlike the others who walked through the mansion doors, Grace didn't seem intimidated by wealth or status. Instead, she carried herself with quiet confidence and a calm warmth that instantly drew Eleanor's attention. Within days, she and Eleanor began to talk like old friends, sharing stories, laughter, and moments of reflection. It had been years since Eleanor had felt so alive in conversation. One afternoon, while dusting in Eleanor's room, Grace watched her struggle to reach for a book on a side table. Grace didn't rush to do it for her. Instead, she gently encouraged, "Try again, ma'am. I'll be here if you need me." Something about her voice was steadying, filled with belief that Eleanor could do more than she had allowed herself. That simple encouragement planted a seed. Eleanor found herself trying small things she had long given up, lifting her arms higher, attempting to shift herself in her chair, moving her legs slightly though they felt heavy as stone. Charles noticed these subtle changes. One day he walked in to find his mother smiling with a kind of determination he hadn't seen in decades. She looked up at him and said, "Grace makes me feel like I can do things again." Charles, though skeptical, was quietly moved. For 20 years, specialists had failed. Yet here was a maid inspiring change with words alone. Over time, Grace became more intentional. Each day, she guided Eleanor through tiny exercises, no different from what therapists had tried before. But this time there was a difference. Grace mixed the physical efforts with emotional strength. She told Eleanor stories of people from her own community who had faced worse and triumphed. She spoke about faith, perseverance, and the power of refusing to give up, no matter how many years had passed. She reminded Eleanor that her body might have forgotten, but her spirit hadn't. There were setbacks. Days when Eleanor cried in frustration, declaring it impossible, shouting that 20 years had broken her beyond repair. On those days, Grace never let go. She would hold Eleanor's hands, look directly into her eyes, and say, "You are not broken, ma'am. You are waiting to be healed." And healing begins when we believe it can happen. Slowly, Eleanor began to dream again. The mansion staff whispered in awe when they saw her lifting herself slightly from her chair with Grace's help. Charles grew torn between disbelief and hope. He wanted to protect his heart from disappointment, but every evening when he saw Grace's patient encouragement and his mother's determination, his faith began to rebuild. The breakthrough came. One rainy afternoon, Grace had Eleanor practice standing by the edge of her bed. She held her tightly, step by step, encouraging every small movement. Eleanor trembled, sweat forming on her brow, tears streaming down her face. And then, with a cry that was half pain and half triumph, she took one shaky step forward. Grace held her steady, whispering, Yes, you can. Don't stop now. Another step followed, and another. After 20 years of immobility, Eleanor's legs remembered how to move. Charles walked into the room just in time to see his mother taking her first independent steps in 2 decades. Grace by her side. He froze, his eyes wide, tears streaming down his cheeks. For a moment, he could not speak. His entire world, built on money and influence, seemed meaningless compared to what he was witnessing. He ran forward, dropping to his knees, catching his mother in his arms as she cried against his shoulder. "I thought I would never walk again," she whispered through sobs. The mansion echoed with joy. Staff members gathered, unable to believe their eyes. News spread through the neighborhood, and soon friends and relatives came to see the miracle themselves. Eleanor was walking again, slowly but surely, her spirit renewed, her smile radiant. Charles could no longer contain his gratitude. One evening, he sat with Grace in the living room. "I've spent fortunes trying to give my mother back her life," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "Yet you, with nothing but your kindness, gave her what no money could buy. How can I ever repay you?" Grace smiled softly and shook her head. "You don't repay love, sir. You share it. That's all I've done." From that day forward, Grace was no longer seen as just a maid. She became part of the family, a daughter to Eleanor and a trusted friend to Charles. Eleanor, with her renewed strength, began enjoying life again, gardening, hosting small gatherings, and even walking hand in hand with her son in the garden she once only viewed from her window. The story of Eleanor's recovery traveled far and wide. It wasn't just about a woman walking after 20 years. It was about the miracle of belief, patience, and human connection. Grace had shown that healing doesn't always come from wealth or science alone, but from the unseen power of hope, compassion, and unwavering faith. By the end of this journey, Charles's definition of wealth had changed forever. He no longer saw his millions as his greatest possession, but the miracle of seeing his mother stand tall again. And as for Grace, she remained the gentle reminder in their lives that sometimes the greatest miracles are born from the simplest acts of love. And so in a mansion where wealth had once bought everything but happiness, a miracle unfolded that no money could ever purchase. Eleanor, who had sat in silence for 20 long years, now walked again, not because of doctors, not because of endless treatments, but because of one woman's courage to believe in her when she no longer believed in herself. Charles finally understood that true riches were not measured in gold, diamonds, or sprawling estates, but in the gift of life restored and the bond of love renewed. Grace had walked into their home as a maid, but she stayed as family, the living proof that compassion and faith can do what the world calls impossible. Eleanor's steps became more than just movement. They became a message that no matter how broken life may seem, no matter how many years pass, there's always hope waiting to rise again. Her journey reminded everyone who saw it that miracles do not always come with thunder and lightning. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through the hands of someone humble, someone kind, someone who refuses to give up on you. And as Charles held his mother's hand while she walked through the garden for the first time in decades, his heart whispered a truth he would never forget. Money can build houses, but love builds miracles.